They say that the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb, but nobody ever warns you that sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones holding the knife. I learned this lesson not in a classroom or a boardroom, but standing on the cobblestone sidewalk of Chestnut Street in Boston with the cold October rain soaking through my cashmere coat. I had just returned from what was meant to be a month of rejuvenation in the rolling hills of Tuscany, only to find my key, a heavy antique brass key that had opened the door to my sanctuary for 30 years, refused to turn in the lock. Through the bay window of the brownstone I had restored with my own hands, I saw strangers. They were drinking wine in my living room, laughing under the light of the chandelier I had purchased in Paris in 1995. When I rang the bell, confused and shivering, a man I had never seen before opened the door and told me to leave his property. My home was gone. My daughter, the child I had nursed through fevers and heartbroken tears, had sold it out from under me while I was sipping espresso in Florence. And when I called her, hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped my phone, she didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She simply said, "You've had it too good for too long, Mom. It's our turn now." But Chloe made a fatal miscalculation. She forgot that before I was her mother, before I was a grandmother, I was Evelyn Sterling, one of the first women to break into the ruthless world of commercial architecture in the 80s. I didn't build skyscrapers by letting people walk all over me, and I certainly wasn't going to start now. Let me take you back to 3 weeks before my world imploded. I was sitting on a terrace overlooking a vineyard in Montepulciano, the golden hour light bathing the ancient stone in a warm glow. At 68, I felt I had finally earned this peace. My career had been illustrious, but exhausting. I had spent 4 decades fighting for respect in boardrooms filled with men who thought a woman's place was bringing them coffee, not designing the skyline. Every promotion, every award, every contract was a battle won through grit and sleepless nights. The brownstone in Beacon Hill was my trophy. I bought it as a dilapidated shell in the early 90s and poured my soul into it. I restored the original molding, sourced period-correct hardwood, and designed a modern, light-filled kitchen that was the heart of the home. It wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of my resilience. I sat there in Italy, journaling in a leather-bound notebook. I wrote about my late husband, Richard, who had passed away from a sudden heart attack 10 years prior. I wrote about Chloe, my only child, and how much I missed her. I wrote about my grandchildren, Leo and Mia, planning the gifts I would bring them, hand-painted marionettes and leather-bound sketchbooks. I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I believed I had raised a capable, independent daughter. Sure, Chloe had always been a bit entitled, perhaps a side effect of growing up with more privilege than I ever had, but I loved her fiercely. Over the last year, however, our conversations had become strained. She and her husband, Julian, were constantly stressed. Julian fancied himself a venture capitalist, a disruptor in the tech world. But from what I could see, he was mostly disrupting their bank account. They had asked for money, and I had given it. $10,000 here for a bridge loan, $5,000 there for unexpected medical bills. I did it because that's what mothers do. We give until we are hollowed out. I had booked the trip to Italy to create some distance, to force them to stand on their own 2 feet for a month. I signed a limited power of attorney before I left, a standard precaution Arthur, my family lawyer, had suggested in case of a medical emergency abroad. It was specifically drafted to handle hospital bills or access to medical records if I were incapacitated. I remember signing it at Chloe's kitchen table, distracted by Leo tugging on my sleeve to show me his Lego castle. Chloe had smiled, that sweet, dimpled smile that used to melt my heart and promised to keep everything in order. I never imagined that smile was the mask of a predator waiting for the prey to look away. The flight back to Boston was long but peaceful. I landed at Logan Airport feeling refreshed, my suitcase heavy with gifts and bottles of olive oil. The taxi ride to Beacon Hill was familiar, the city looking beautiful under the gray autumn sky. When the cab pulled up to 124 Chestnut Street, I felt that familiar swell of pride. My home, my safe harbor. Then came the key that wouldn't turn. Then came the stranger. The man at the door was aggressive, his face flushed with irritation. He told me his name was David Miller and he had closed on the property 2 weeks ago. He showed me the deed on his phone, a digital document that looked terrifyingly official. It listed the seller as Evelyn Sterling, represented by Chloe Sterling Hayes via power of attorney. The sale price was $2 million, significantly under market value for a renovated historic brownstone in this neighborhood. I stood on the sidewalk as the door slammed in my face, the heavy thud echoing in my chest. I was stranded on the street with 2 suitcases and a heart that was rapidly shattering. I dialed Chloe. She answered on the second ring, her voice breezy, as if she were discussing the weather. "Mom, you're back early," she said. "Chloe, I'm standing in front of my house. Why is there a strange man telling me he owns it?" There was a pause, a heavy silence that screamed of guilt. Then the facade dropped. "Look, Mom, we had to do it. Julian was in trouble. Deep trouble. We were going to lose everything." "You sold my home?" My voice was a whisper strangled by shock. "You sold my home while I was out of the country? It's just a house, Mom. You don't need all that space. It's selfish, really, for one old woman to hoard a 4-bedroom brownstone when your family is drowning. We use the power of attorney. It was legal. It was for medical emergencies." I screamed, ignoring the passers-by who turned to stare. The lawyer said it was broad enough. We got the money, we paid off the debts, and we put the rest in an account. You can move into that nice senior living community in Brookline, the one near the park. It's better for you anyway. I felt like I was dissociating. She had planned my life, evicted me, and spent my assets, all without a single conversation. "I am not going to a senior living community, Chloe. I am coming to your house. And we are going to fix this." "No, you're not," she said, her voice cold and hard. "You're going to a hotel. You need to cool off. You're being hysterical. And honestly, Mom, you should be thanking us. We saved the family from ruin." She hung up. I stood there staring at the phone, the screen turning black. The rain began to fall harder, mixing with the hot tears tracking down my cheeks. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean against a lamppost. My own daughter, the girl I had taught to ride a bike, the woman whose wedding I had paid for. She had discarded me like an old piece of furniture she no longer had a use for. But as the shock began to recede, a cold steel rod of anger replaced it. Chloe thought I was a frail old woman who would weep and accept her fate. She thought Grandma Evelyn was soft. She had forgotten that I was Evelyn Sterling, the woman who had once stared down a union strike to get a project finished on time. I wiped my face, straightened my coat, and hailed a cab. I wasn't going to a hotel to cry. I was going to war. My first stop was the Omni Parker House Hotel. It was expensive, but I needed a base of operations, and I refused to stay in a motel. Once I was in the room, I didn't unpack. I opened my laptop. I have always been meticulous with records. Every deed, every bank statement, every legal document was digitized and backed up on a secure cloud server. I pulled up the original power of attorney document. I read the fine print. It was restrictive, granting authority only in the event of incapacitation or medical necessity. It did not grant the right to liquidate real estate assets for the agent's personal gain. Next, I logged into my bank accounts. My heart stopped. The savings account, the one I had built up for my retirement and for my grandchildren's college funds, was decimated. $300,000 transferred out in a series of transactions starting 3 days after I left for Italy. I called Arthur Pendleton. It was 10 o'clock at night, but Arthur had been my friend and legal counsel for 30 years. He answered immediately. "Evelyn? I thought you were in Tuscany. I'm in Boston, Arthur, and I need you to meet me at your office at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Chloe has sold my house." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. She did what? She sold the brownstone. She emptied the accounts. She's claiming the power of attorney allowed it. I'll see you at 7, Evelyn. Bring everything. The next morning, Arthur's office felt like a bunker. He sat behind his mahogany desk, his face gray with rage as he reviewed the documents I had printed out. "This isn't just a misuse of power of attorney, Evelyn," he said, his voice low. "This is grand larceny. This is fraud. This is elder abuse. The document we drafted was specific. No title company in their right mind would have accepted this for a real estate closing unless—" "Unless what?" I asked. "Unless she doctored it, or unless she found a crooked notary and a negligent title officer." We spent the next 6 hours reconstructing the crime. Arthur hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Marcus, to dig into Julian and Chloe's financials. By the afternoon, we had a clearer picture, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Julian hadn't just made bad investments, he was gambling on unregulated cryptocurrency exchanges, leveraging money he didn't have. He owed money to people you don't want to owe money to. They were drowning in debt, mortgage arrears on their suburban McMansion, maxed out credit cards, luxury car leases they couldn't afford. They had been living a lie for years, fueling a lifestyle of country clubs and designer clothes with debt, waiting for me to die so they could inherit. When I didn't die fast enough, they decided to expedite the inheritance. The sale of the brownstone had netted $2 million. After paying off the mortgage on the house, which was small, I had nearly paid it off. The proceeds were roughly $1.8 million. Marcus found that $1.2 million had already been moved, half to pay off Julian's investors, and the other half transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. "They're hiding the money," Arthur said, slamming a file shut. "They know this is illegal. They're trying to secure the cash before you get back. Can I get my home back?" That was the only question that mattered to me. Arthur took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It's complicated. The Millers, the couple who bought it, are likely bona fide purchasers for value. If they didn't know about the fraud, the court is hesitant to evict them. We would have to prove that the sale was void ab initio, from the beginning. That means proving forgery or total lack of authority. Then let's prove it." We filed an emergency injunction that afternoon. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Halloway, granted a temporary freeze on all of Chloe and Julian's known accounts. It was the first shot across the bow. I didn't tell Chloe I was doing it. I let her find out when her credit card was declined at Whole Foods. 2 days later, my phone exploded with texts from her. "Mom, what did you do? My cards aren't working. We can't pay the nanny. Call me immediately. You are being vindictive and cruel." I didn't answer. I sat in my hotel room, staring at the view of the city, feeling a profound sense of isolation. I realized that in order to save myself, I had to destroy my daughter. It was a choice no mother should ever have to make, but she had forced my hand. She had chosen money over me. Now I had to choose justice over her. The week before the preliminary hearing, I decided to confront them. Arthur advised against it, but I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to see if there was any remorse, any shred of the child I had raised left in that woman. I took an Uber to their house in Wellesley. It was a sprawling, modern farmhouse-style home, manicured and perfect on the outside. I rang the bell. Julian answered, looking disheveled. When he saw me, his lip curled in a sneer. "You have a lot of nerve coming here, Evelyn. Freezing our accounts? Do you know how embarrassing that is?" I walked past him into the foyer. "Where is she?" Chloe came down the stairs. She looked tired but defiant. She wasn't the apologetic daughter. She was the cornered animal. "You need to drop this lawsuit, Mom," she said, crossing her arms. "We can give you an allowance. We can set you up in a nice apartment. But you can't just freeze our assets. That money is ours now." "It was never yours, Chloe. I worked 40 years for that home. I missed your school plays for that home. I broke through glass ceilings for that home. And you sold it to pay for Julian's gambling addiction." "It wasn't gambling," Julian shouted. "It was high-risk venture capital. It was foolishness," I snapped, my voice echoing in the high-ceilinged entry. "And you dragged my daughter into it." "Nobody dragged me," Chloe said, stepping next to her husband. "We are partners, and we did what was necessary. You're old, Mom. You don't need the wealth anymore. We have a future to build. We have your grandchildren to support. Don't you dare use Leo and Mia as shields," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "If you cared about them, you wouldn't have committed a felony. You wouldn't have risked going to prison." "Prison?" Julian laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Nobody goes to prison for family disputes. You're bluffing." I looked at them, really looked at them. I saw the greed, the entitlement, the complete lack of moral compass. They didn't think they had done anything wrong. They truly believed that my assets were their entitlement and I was just an obstacle to be managed. "I'm not bluffing," I said quietly. "I'm pressing charges." Chloe's face went pale. "You wouldn't. I already have. The district attorney is reviewing the file. Grand larceny, forgery, elder financial abuse." "Mom, please." Chloe's voice cracked, the defiance slipping for a second. "You can't send us to jail. What about the kids?" "You should have thought about the kids when you forged my signature on the deed transfer." "Wait," Julian said, stepping forward aggressively. "We didn't forge anything. You signed a POA. I signed a POA for medical decisions. The deed transfer required a specific real estate power of attorney or my direct signature. Arthur pulled the records from the Registry of Deeds. The signature on the transfer document isn't Chloe Sterling Hayes as agent for. It's a clumsy attempt at my signature. You forged my name, Chloe." The silence in the hallway was deafening. Chloe looked at the floor. Julian looked at the wall. "Get out," Julian whispered. I turned to leave. As I reached the door, I looked back at my daughter. "I hope it was worth it, Chloe. I hope the money was worth losing your mother. The legal battle was brutal." They hired a flashy defense attorney who tried to paint me as senile, claiming I had verbally authorized the sale and then forgotten. They tried to drag my medical records into court, tried to suggest that my grief over Richard had made me mentally unstable. It was humiliating. I had to sit in a deposition for 6 hours while a man half my age asked me if I knew what year it was and if I recognized the president. But Arthur was brilliant. He didn't just play defense, he went on the offensive. We subpoenaed the notary who had stamped the fraudulent deed. Under pressure and facing his own charges, the notary flipped. He admitted that Julian had paid him $5,000 cash to notarize the document without me present, and that he had watched Chloe sign my name. That was the smoking gun. The trial for the civil suit regarding the house came first. The testimony was damning. The forensic accountant traced the flow of money from the sale to the crypto wallets to the offshore accounts and to the luxury car dealership where Julian had put a down payment on a Porsche the day after the closing. I sat in the courtroom watching the jury. I saw their expressions shift from curiosity to disgust. They saw a successful, dignified woman who had been pilfered by her own flesh and blood. When I took the stand, I didn't cry. I spoke clearly and firmly. "Mrs. Sterling," the defense attorney asked, "didn't you tell your daughter you wanted to downsize?" "I told my daughter I wanted to travel," I corrected him. "I told her I wanted to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I never told her I wanted to be homeless. But you aren't homeless, are you?" "You have means." "My home is not an asset on a spreadsheet, sir. It is the place where my husband died. It is the place where my memories live. To sell it for scrap to cover bad debts is a violation of everything I hold dear." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned a verdict in my favor on all counts. The sale was declared void ab initio due to fraud. The Millers, the poor couple who had bought the house, were devastated. They would lose the house, though they would get their money back from the escrow insurance and could sue Chloe and Julian for damages. I felt for them. I really did, but I couldn't set myself on fire to keep them warm. Winning the civil case was the first victory. The criminal case was the tragedy. 3 months later, I sat in the back of a different courtroom. Chloe and Julian were facing the consequences of the district attorney's investigation. Faced with the notary's testimony and the overwhelming paper trail, they had pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of fraud and larceny to avoid a trial that would have surely resulted in a decade-long sentence. The judge sentenced Julian to 4 years in state prison. He was the mastermind, the one who pushed for the forgery, the one with the gambling debts. Chloe, because she had cooperated in the final stages and had no prior record, was sentenced to 18 months. Watching a bailiff put handcuffs on my daughter was the single most painful moment of my life. She looked back at me as she was led away. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked broken. She mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." I didn't wave. I just nodded, acknowledging the apology, but not accepting the action. The aftermath was a quiet sort of devastation. I moved back into the brownstone. The Millers had moved out, taking their furniture, but the ghost of their short tenancy remained. Different paint colors in the guest room, new hardware on the cabinets. I spent weeks scrubbing the house, trying to reclaim it, trying to wash away the feeling of violation. The hardest part was the silence. No Sunday dinners, no phone calls. Leo and Mia were sent to live with Julian's sister in Ohio. I fought for visitation, and thankfully the sister was a sensible woman who understood that the children needed their grandmother. We spoke on FaceTime every Sunday. They were confused, angry, and sad. "Grandma, why is Mommy in time out?" Leo asked me once. "Because Mommy and Daddy made some mistakes, Leo. Big mistakes. And when grown-ups make mistakes, they have to fix them, even if it takes a long time. I didn't poison them against their parents. That wasn't my job. Life would teach them the truth soon enough." 6 months into Chloe's sentence, I received a letter from the correctional facility. The handwriting was shaky, lacking the bold loops Chloe used to use. "Dear Mom, I have a lot of time to think in here. I think about the brownstone. I think about how safe I felt there when I was a kid. I realized that I didn't just sell a house, I sold our history. Julian convinced me that we were entitled to it, that you owed us. I see now how twisted that was. I was weak, I was greedy, and I was scared. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I am glad you fought back. You taught me the hard way. That dignity isn't something you can buy, and it certainly isn't something you can steal. I hope, one day, I can be half the woman you are. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, right next to the deed to the house. I am 70 years old now. I live alone in my beautiful, restored brownstone. The morning light still hits the kitchen island exactly the way I designed it to. I still drink my coffee looking out at the street, but I am different. I used to believe that family was unconditional. I know now that love can be unconditional, but access to your life, your heart, and your security must have conditions. It must be earned with respect. I have started consulting again, taking on small projects for a nonprofit that builds housing for at-risk women. I use my skills to create spaces of safety for those who have none. It gives me purpose. I visit Chloe once a month. We talk through the glass partition. It's awkward, and the chasm between us is vast, filled with hurt and legal fees and lost time. But we are building a bridge, brick by brick. It will never be the same structure it was before. It will be narrower, more guarded. But it will be built on truth, not on the quicksand of entitlement. The lesson I learned is this: you can love someone with every fiber of your being, but you cannot save them from themselves, and you certainly shouldn't destroy yourself trying. There is a profound difference between being a mother and being a martyr. I refuse to be the latter, and sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the streets of Beacon Hill, I walk through my house, touching the walls, the banister, the windows. I am here. I am standing. I am Evelyn Sterling, and I am the architect of my own life, down to the very last brick. No one takes that away from me. Not ever again. So to anyone reading this who feels obligated to set themselves on fire to keep others warm, listen to me. Don't. Put on your own coat, lock your door, and if the key doesn't turn, kick the door down. You are worth fighting for.